So type ones, the perfectionists, are very principled, they are ethical, and they have a deep desire to improve the world around them. And no one shows that in their work better than Caitlyn. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Grow RDH podcast. Today we are starting off our first interview of the 9 Enneagram types, and we are going to start with the type 1. And to join us, we have Caitlyn Lint. Caitlyn Lint is a dental hygienist from South Dakota. We have had the privilege to work together for a few years now. And so I'm so excited to interview her about her experiences as a type 1. If you listened to the first episode of this series, we gave a brief overview of all of the different types, 1 through 9. But just to sort of introduce the type 1, I am going to provide a little bit of context. So type 1s are considered the perfectionists. That's their nickname, if you will. And as a reminder, a lot of the resources that I'm going to be using or talking about come from The Road Back to You. And this is a book that I highly recommend if you want to dig deeper into the Enneagram and how it impacts your life. There is a book and there is a study guide workbook with a lot of really good questions, and it allows you to really reflect. And I love the questions in this book. So highly recommend. I will link this in the description for you to check out. So type 1s, the perfectionists, are very principled, they are ethical, and they have a deep desire to improve the world around them. And no one shows that in their work better than Caitlyn. So I think we have the perfect interviewer here. They have a really strong sense of right and wrong, and they strive for perfection, not only for themselves, but others as well. So at their best, they're very discerning. They're great advocates for change. So that's why I think they're a great teammate in a dental setting, because they are the ones that drive us to be our best. They are the ones that are looking at the guidelines and looking at our policies and making sure that everything aligns and we are doing things the way that we're supposed to do them. However, some of the weaknesses is that they can be a little bit rigid and sometimes very critical, especially when others aren't meeting their very high standards. Again, always a good thing. Learning and growing is good, but sometimes the rigidity can make it a little bit of a hurdle to get across. And their core fear is being corrupt in some way or being wrong. And so that leads them into their core motivation, or how they interact with others, is to live with integrity and purpose. So I am excited to get into this interview. I'm going to pull up my questions, Caitlyn. And we're just going to start with the traits of being principled, perfectionist, and detail-oriented. So first, we're going to introduce Caitlyn and let her tell us a little bit about her background, her professional journey as a hygienist, and how she has interacted with different workplaces, different clinical settings, and as now she's an educator. So I'm going to let her give a little bit of a background of her path thus far.
So I graduated from USD in 2018 from the dental hygiene program, and then I went on to get my master's in public health and finish that in 2021. So since then, I have gotten the opportunity to work as a temp hygienist in Sioux Falls and some of the surrounding areas. When I first got out of school, I probably had about 10 different offices that I was going between, and I got a really good mix of rural health, community health, a more corporate style practice, and then just smaller, more well-established private practices. So in my experience as a young hygienist, it was super beneficial to work for dentists that were at the early beginnings of their career versus dentists that were closer to retirement. I've gotten to work with hygienists who, same thing, are at the beginning of their career and closer to the end. And it was a super, super impactful time. I now have been with USD for 3 years. I work there full time, and then I still am able to do some of my own clinical practice in the summers and over our school breaks, which has been beneficial too. I think I was teased. I think every hygienist should get the opportunity to go back to school like I have and implement some of the things that we kind of forget, or that are muscle memory to us as experienced hygienists. And you're like, oh yeah, I should have better posture. I should be holding my instruments a little bit better. So it's been super beneficial to have a balance of.
Yeah, I think keeping one foot in clinical and one foot in education is so essential. If you're out of clinical, you lose that real world practical experience. But then when you're all education, you're so focused on the rules and you're forgetting
Yes.
that sometimes those rules don't always completely integrate into the real world. And that's
For
hard.
sure. And I think even specifically to what I do at USD, I get to have a really strong foot with our juniors, our first year hygiene students, really focusing on the nitty gritty rules and the black and white of dental hygiene. And then I get to have a really strong foot with the seniors too, and get to kind of dabble in a little bit more of the gray area of hygiene and get to talk about my own clinical experience again that kind of lives in that gray area. So I'm super fortunate to have the opportunity to kind of reflect on both. And I think everybody needs a little reminder of the black and white sometimes.
Yes, I agree. Which kind of segues perfectly into the black and white of being a
Yes.
perfectionist. And you're probably the perfect person, in our educational setting to be in that role. So, how does that leads us into the first question? How does that drive for excellence, for perfection, play out in your day to day tasks as a hygienist? And you can kind of talk about both clinically in your private practices or in your education setting.
Yeah. So, in my experience clinically, I know that just how I felt about my standard of patient care is super high. And I even get that reflected back to me from our patients. And I know we all have patients that we connect more with than others, but I get to see that reflected back just in feedback I get from patients, from my dentist that I work with. I really enjoy learning from other people, and I feel like that's a really good trait about me, but it also kind of fine tunes the perfectionist element of like, I'm learning because I want to be
Perfect.
perfect. I want to do everything to the highest standard. And in my school life, as an educator, I think too, just helping them, dental hygiene is black and white and at times, and we have to be so detail oriented. And I do feel like I'm able to help the students understand like these little details matter. They all kind of mount up to this big picture of dental hygiene. And as a student, I think sometimes they can't see that big picture yet. And so I think it helps, sometimes when I can explain, like, yeah, I'm nitpicking this little thing about you because I want you to build all those little things into, an idea of perfection, so to speak.
Right. So, are there any specific aspects where, like clinically or in teaching, where you feel this trait shines the most? Like, what is your biggest strength? What do you always lean on when you are dealing with those nitpicky things? What is your favorite trait?
My favorite trait about myself is just my level of organization. I am super on top of it. I feel like when I was working private practice and had a more regular patient base, I just remembered a lot of little things about them to help create like a more well-rounded experience. A, for my doctor when they were coming in to do exams, and B, for my patient. Of just, hey, I remembered this little quirk about you. I remembered, your diagnosis from last time. We're going to build a treatment plan, or just even prepping my doctor on all of the little things just to try to make their life as easy as possible. And I feel like I do that maybe sometimes to a fault with our students too, of just, I want to be on top of it. We have 36 seniors right now, and I want someone to say, hey, what's going on with student A? And I want to be able to just tell you because I have all of that at the ready. And like I said, maybe sometimes to a fault, I'm organized with our students, but I would say that's one of my biggest strengths in both kind of arenas.
Yeah. So, leading into maybe some of the high stakes situations, especially with a student, maybe it's a competency or it's a test. With a patient, it may be making a connection or getting treatment acceptance. How do you manage that voice that pushes for perfection in a profession that sometimes is gray? Sometimes there is no black and white. How do you manage that?
So that was a skill that I had to learn. The first couple years were tough, and I speak clinically the first couple years, but one of the most helpful things was getting to work for a variety of dentists. In my clinical experience, I've been in office settings where a treatment is proposed and that's it. There is no conversation. There's no debate with a patient. It's regardless of your insurance, regardless of your abilities, this is what I've recommended. This is what you're going to do. And then I've gotten to work in some offices where a dentist has posed maybe a good, better, best option. And all three of those are great. Maybe you can't afford to have a crown right now. Maybe we can do nothing. Maybe we could do a filling, or maybe we could do the best thing, which would be a crown. And so for me, that was one of the most helpful experiences, because it kind of helped me redefine maybe what perfection looks like. Especially working in community health and with a couple of my offices have a heavy geriatric population. And so it's just the ability to accept care is just on a different plane than maybe in different aspects of private practice. And so I think too, like I have some patients where the course of time that I've treated you, like you are at your perfect, even though compared to maybe a different perio case or a different restorative case, you're far from it. And so I think that was like the most valuable thing. And I think that's helped me translate into the academic setting too. They're all different clinically, academically. And so there are students where your level of perfect or the best that we can do is different. Kind of amongst all of them. Having that going from clinical to education, I think has really kind of helped me redefine the standards of perfection, so to speak.
Yeah, no, I really like that, to redefine it, to view it in different contexts, kind of. That leads into, were there any support or resources aside from maybe the different dentists that you were working for?
Mm-hmm.
Was there anything that you used, resources or checks and balances that you kind of had to put in place to keep your standards kind of regulated, if that makes sense?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that does make sense. I was super lucky. I have an office in Sioux Falls that I've been at for since I've come out of school, and I still sub there regularly. And when I got there, our office assistants and hygienists was primarily older clinicians, and you don't see that a lot. And so getting to work with hygienists who have been there for 20, 30, 40 years, that was my check and balance. We come out of school like with this like vigor of like, I'm going to nail every injection. I'm going to remove every piece of calculus. Every SRP is going to be bliss. And having them remind me of like, that doesn't happen. You're going to leave calc behind, and not in a negative put you down kind of way, but like a build you up of like, yeah, you probably did leave that piece behind. And guess what? It happens. You're going to see them again, and you're going to have another chance to get it. And so I think too, kind of tying in that like redefining perfection, like as a young hygienist, there's so much you're trying to fit into a shorter amount of time. You're still trying to hone your skill set, and you're trying to build confidence within yourself. Like my biggest resource was having those more experienced clinicians around me to say like, you are doing a good job. What you're expecting of yourself is maybe not realistic for an hour's time. And
Yeah.
it just did kind of reshape like who I am and what I'm expecting to do, or what I'm expecting to change about my patient in 60 minutes twice a year.
Yeah, I love that. So it sounds like the support you had was other hygienists and
Yes.
other people that really built you up. I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, next is maybe in terms of ethical dilemmas or disagreements. So Enneagram Ones, typically their internal motivation is to not be wrong. And so they have a strong sense of right and wrong, a strong sense of good versus bad. And sometimes that can influence like our relationships and those that we have to work with every day. So how has that influenced your approach to maybe say an ethical dilemma with a patient or a disagreement in an office? How have you seen that play out in your work setting?
Yeah. So, as a really young hygienist right out of school, I had a really, really small office with a really big perio population. And these patients had been in the office for eons and were not necessarily interested in oral health education. And that experience, I would say, helped me learn to pick my battles. Because you're right, I want to get my message across, and I want you to accept what I'm saying. I want you to hear what I'm saying. And so I just really learned to read my audience, I guess. Is there any leeway here? Is the door even a little bit open for me to try to change your mind? One of my most memorable experiences that I still tell the students about is finishing a full mouth probe on a patient and starting to talk about perio and perinatal therapy, and my patient being like, no, thank you. And it was a huge, like, again, for a type 1 perfectionist like me, it was like a pearl clutching moment of like, like, what?
Rude.
I've never had the door just slammed on me quite like that. And so I think that was a huge moment to like pick my battles. Like in that moment, there's nothing I can do to change your mind. You are rooted in what you want to do. And even just, with coworkers too, there's people that maybe our work ethic, maybe our personality styles clash. And it is just like a pick your battles. Do you and I have any common ground in the way that we operate that we can kind of forge a path forward? Or is it just best if we just kind of maintain our own lanes and work civilly side by side? So I think that's been a huge, huge growth opportunity, is just where do I stand with this, and what's the opportunity for growth here?
Yeah. It's interesting. And I think this highlights how a lot of us have similar outcomes when it comes to. So I'm a type 8, and one of my main motivators is control, and I like having control. And so I might experience that situation as kind of similar, whereas your underlying belief is like, wait, no, you should do this because it's right and good. And
Mm-hmm.
my underlining motivator is like, wait, I'm out of control in this situation. Why, like, I need to be controlling the narrative. And so while we both might not like that because it's uncomfortable, it's a different reason why. And I think that's so interesting to kind of unpack, because your reason for not liking that situation is because it's not right. It's not the right thing, right? So it's just interesting how we both might not like a situation, but it's the reasons underneath it.
The lens is different.
Yes, but I still have to learn how to pick my battles because I can't control everything, and that is hard for me.
Ditto.
So, Enneagram Ones have a natural talent for, and you kind of already touched on this, creating systems and improving processes through organization, because it helps them sort of obviously organize and be perfect. Have you ever seen this strength kind of play out when you've tried to implement change, you've tried to streamline something, or implement things that you have wanted, and how was it received by others?
Yeah, so in my clinical experience, working in offices, I haven't ever had like a full-time position in an office. And so I haven't always been, in like a leadership position or in a permanent enough role to come in and, change a perio process or change what's going on in an office. I do feel like I maybe lend some influence when they're trying to make decisions. I've had some offices where I've worked part-time, and we really helped to change like the flow of how do assistants and hygienists interact to kind of make a more feasible, helpful situation there, and keeping people up to date, I guess, with perio. I guess the beauty of being an educator and a clinician is you can kind of pull some of those back and forth. In my educational experience, organization is huge. And I feel like I've gotten the opportunity to kind of change the way that that looks, as far as I want us as faculty and our students to feel like they're in the know and always on top of things. I'd want to be like as transparent as possible. And I feel like that's been really well received by the students. And I feel like they give me that feedback a lot. Of they can say, hey, where am I at with, these tasks or these competencies or these patients? And I can very quickly say, you've done these things, you still need to do this. And I think that helps as we try to advise our students as faculty. And I know, like I said, our students have really appreciated that, just in the midst of all of their academics and their clinical rotations, just not feeling lost with what they need to have done.
Yes, and I can 100% speak on the receiving end of that. Obviously, Caitlin and I work together, and she has completely streamlined the way competencies are tracked and student progress is monitored. And so, yes, you are amazing at that. So, how do you manage then? Maybe, and you kind of already touched on picking your battles, but how do you manage situations where maybe it's coworkers or maybe it's students, they don't share the same attention to detail as you do? How do you stress the importance, or how do you maybe just pick your battle and you don't? Who knows?
Yeah, this question I think is so interesting to me because we've done, our department's done the Clifton strengths, and my number one strength was harmony. And I remember getting that result and thinking, no. But when you read their definition of the word, it is like you want an equal distribution of the work. If I'm giving 110%, I also expect that you're giving 110%. And I do, in full honesty, struggle with that both clinically. I know in my offices that I've been a more regular presence at, you ask those resentful questions of like, what happens when I'm not gone? Am I the only one who takes out the garbage? Am I the only one who keeps up with this stuff? Am I the only one who knows how to do this? Like when you do ask those questions, and they're selfish questions at times, and I've, in any work setting, even education too, you expect, especially with the students, sometimes you do so much and you want them to also give 110% back. And it's not always a realistic expectation. And I think you've used the word control too. And I am a self identified control freak. And so I think having a more realistic expectation of like, okay, I changed this process, and because it's my way, I'm giving 110%. I can't expect you to adapt to everything that I want to do it exactly how I want you to do it, and in the time frame that I want you to do it in. It's just not realistic. But that doesn't mean that I don't struggle with that or have those like internal conversations of like, like, yeah, I worked for 4 hours on this today. Why didn't you also spend 4 hours on this task? Like, it's just not realistic, but it doesn't mean that you don't have those internal monologues.
Yeah. And that sometimes leads to burnout. I know there are a few Enneagram types that struggle with burnout, but again, for different reasons. For example, type twos are helpers, they're givers. They're literally just doing everything they can to, because that's how they feel valued. So they can struggle with burnout because of that. But sometimes ones might struggle with burnout because they're afraid that if they delegate tasks to others, they won't be done to their expectations. They want it done this way. Do you struggle with burnout, and how do you handle that?
I struggled in my clinical practice with burnout, and it didn't matter where I was at. I just felt that same kind of, like I said, just those same feelings of I am really proud of my work ethic and some of my perfectionist tendencies. And so I struggle with that when I'm not feeling like everyone else is contributing the same way that I am. And I felt that pretty heavily when I was working full time as a clinician. And that I really struggled with that. In my educational practice, I feel far less burnt out, but I know I struggle more with delegating tasks. And that's a hard thing too. Your burnout comes in a totally different way because your plate's full, but it's from my own doing. I could pass some off every once in a while, but you just choose not to. And so it's a 2025 maybe a resolution, I guess.
Yeah, not being burnt out, right? Delegating more,
Yes.
maybe.
Yes. Delegate more, ask for help more.
Yeah. So, what strategies or habits do you think promote that? If in 2025, December 2025, you want to delegate more, what are some strategies or habits that you've kind of already implemented or plan to implement to allow yourself to delegate more and release some of that control over perfection?
Yeah, I think this fall semester was even like a good exercise in that. I have people in my circle. We're all really hard workers in our department. And I have people that you have a trusting relationship with to pass some of those tasks on. And I've started to kind of ask myself, like, do you need a hand in this fire? Is this going to turn out just fine without you? And that's been like it's hard to ask yourself that. And it's hard to step away sometimes. But sometimes I try to like take an outsider looking in perspective and just say, like, are these people getting this accomplished without me? Can I obviously I will contribute, do what I need to do, but like, you've got this, my plate already has enough on it. And so just a little like self-reflection, a quick little check-in of like, how badly do you need to be a part of this?
Yes. I
Trying
really
to
like
say no
that.
a little bit more.
Yeah. I like that. Like, do you need your hand in this fire? I really like that
Yeah. And
reflection.
sometimes the answer is yes. And it's like, I need to contribute a small piece versus like, do I need my hand fully in the fire? Like, do I need to be at the forefront of this operation, or, like, just trusting that they got it. It's going to turn out fine.
I
Hard.
love that. Yes, I totally get that. But I like that. I really like that question. I think it's helpful and it's practical. Something that people can ask themselves, right? That's something we can use. So I want to end on a positive note. This will be the last question. How do you celebrate successes or small wins in your role? Because ones sometimes can focus always on what still needs improvement, right? And that's okay. That's a good thing. We're always looking forward. We're always looking for improvement. But sometimes ones can be like, but this still needs done. So, how do you, in your personal, professional life, how do you celebrate successes? How do you view a project as done?
So you hit the nail on the head. That is totally the definition of me. Like, great, you did this one thing, but you still have 9 more things to go. So, like, don't celebrate yet, you know? And I do think that I'm a list person through and through. I love writing lists. I love the feeling of checking things off. And so I think just changing my perspective of like, okay, you've got 5 things on the list and you've only checked off 2, but like you've checked off 2. You don't have 5 more things left to do. You only, you've gotten 2 of those things done, not like you still have 3 things left. It's like you got 2 of those things done. Your list is shorter than it was when you started today. So just kind of like changing my perspective a little bit. I'm not, even in my own personal life, I'm not always very good at slowing down to be like, oh my gosh, you got a house. It's like, okay, I got a house, but now I need to make this improvement, or I need to do this, or, and so just like taking a beat to kind of reflect a little bit, just to be a little bit more mindful on where I'm at, where I'm going, and what I've done versus what I have yet to do.
Yeah, that reminds me of, I don't remember if it was like an Instagram post or something, but it reminds me of somebody that said instead of doing to-do lists now, they just make a got done list. So then at the end
Really
of the
good idea.
day, that's the only thing on their list is everything that they accomplished. So that kind of reminded me of that.
That I should try to change. I should try to do that. Would be a
Yeah.
good goal. At least try it out for like a little January change up.
There you go. There you go. Well, thank you so much. I think that it's just really rewarding to kind of focus on our strengths, right? That's why the Clifton strengths are so valuable because it's not necessarily what we struggle with. But I do think it's also important to just be very self aware of what we can fall into. So I appreciate you being so open and vulnerable and talking about these things. And do you have any final comments, words of wisdom for anybody listening?
No, I honestly didn't know my Enneagram until recently. And so I think while I'm not surprised by the results, I do think that it's worth it to, for anybody outside of dental hygiene, even just to know that about yourself interpersonally with your spouse, family, friends. Like it's very interesting to kind of see maybe where you're disconnecting or maybe where you connect really well. I think when I read up on type 1, they do a good job of talking about what type 1s are like as kids and what type 1s can be like as parents. And the description of a type 1 child was so me. That was me as a kid. I was like, did someone peek into my childhood and describe this? And so it was really fascinating to kind of see as they describe each type, what each type is like as a parent too, and strengths. And so I thought that was super interesting. So I would definitely advocate, like I said, career, interprofessionally, interpersonally, like it's super worthwhile information to know.
Yeah, it's funny because I make the seniors do this as part of their professional development, and we've been doing it for years now. And that is the one of the main comments. They're like, "Oh my gosh, it was like I was reading my diary from high school." That's what they always tell me. It's like somebody was like watching me in school, and I'm like, that's why I just love it because it's so unique compared to other personality
Yeah,
tests and
it
questions.
was. The kid part, I was like, oh my God, this is me. That was me as a kid. Like someone watched a tape of my life and typed this up, because that was definitely me.
Yeah. And
Crazy. It
now
was
it's
super
even fun
cool.
because I can kind of see that in my children too. And you can kind of see some of those things coming out already. I mean, my twin girls are 6 already, and I'm like, ooh,
You're
I
like,
see.
I'm sensing a type here.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, so I appreciate your time, and it's
For
always a
sure.
joy to chat with you anyway. So everybody listening, if you enjoyed this content and you found value in it, please like, share, subscribe, and make sure you tune in to next week when we interview an Enneagram Type 2. And we will see you next Friday.